Welcome to California Project Launch webinar series for 2019. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, Family Engagement from the Inside Out, how to prepare your organization to authentically and respectfully engage families and communities. You will be muted as you join the call to avoid any background noise throughout this presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar and questions and answers section, please type them in the chat box. There will be 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that you type in the chat. Okay, my name is Lilia Rodriguez and I provide support to Project Launch. And today our presenter is Dara Griffin. She's a Launch Family and Community Engagement Consultant at TTG Training and Consulting. So Dara, are you here with us? Welcome.
I am here. Thank you, Lilia. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to some of us. Good morning to others. Thank you for joining the webinar today. Just a little bit about California Project Launch. Myself, Dara Griffin, and Carla Keener from Alameda First Five. We were the technical advisors and we were the technical advisors and trainers for the family and community engagement strategy for California Project Launch. A little bit more about myself. I'm a parent. I have 3 children. I have a 20-year-old son, a 16-year-old son, and a 13-year-old son. And I came into the work as a parent. And so that's just a little bit about my background. I hold being a parent very close to all the work that I do, and always trying to remember the things that parents need to know, things that parents need to feel when they're being engaged, especially by large, complex systems. So today's webinar is mostly really about how do we prepare our own organizations or our own large, complex systems to receive parents. And also, how can we be prepared to authentically and respectfully engage families? What structures need to be in place for any approach that we're using so that we can be successful and sustain success? Next slide, please. So again, welcome. We have welcome in many different languages. Because there's so many of us on the call, we're not able to do formal introductions in terms of who is on the call, but I can tell from the registration that we're coming from multiple states, we're coming from multiple complex systems, we're coming from early care and education, we're coming from K-12, we're coming from child welfare, and we're coming from human service systems. So thank you very much for being here this morning. So I'd like to start with what is family engagement?
Get it from the computer. I couldn't. Usually you can get it like through your browser.
Is whoever that is speaking, is it possible for you to mute yourself if you're joining from the phone? Okay, so we're gonna start with what is family engagement. There are a lot of definitions for what family engagement is out there, depending on what system you're coming from. I'm gonna use the one that I like most, and that is on the next page. So the definition of family engagement that we're using here, when we refer to family engagement, we're referring as the systematic inclusion of families as partners in children's development, learning, and wellness. Engagement is enabled by positive relationships between families and staff in institutions where children learn. The goal of family engagement is to support family wellness and children's learning and development. That will be our working definition for family engagement for this webinar. Why is everyone wanting, in many systems and complex systems, wanting to engage families? Next slide, please. In the introduction, or even in the title of the webinar, it talks about the description. We talk about several tools and frameworks around why systems would like to better and more effectively engage families. We're going to talk about, spend a little time now about the why. And we will use the frameworks that are out there that any of us can access on a regular basis to answer the question why. Next slide, please.
Not here, right?
For those who are on the phone, is it possible for you to mute your telephone? Okay, maybe it's not possible to mute it. Okay, so
you log in, okay? Okay, just want to make sure. No, like technical difficulties.
Oh, I thought are you on there?
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta mute yours.
okay. Hello again. So to answer the systems level why, this is a really great framework from the Head Start world. It talks about at the top, positive and goal-oriented relationships, that we're using equity, inclusiveness, cultural and linguistic responsiveness to engage and effectively engage families. So there are program foundations, program impact areas, family outcomes, and then there are the child outcomes that we want to see. So overall, systems want to engage families respectfully and effectively so that we have positive outcomes for families and children. Next slide, please. For the Head Start. Sorry, can you all hear me? For the Head Start parent and family engagement outcomes, there are the 7 domains. You see here, they have defined what family well-being means, what positive parent-child relationships means, what families as lifelong educators looks like, families as learners, family engagement in transition, family connectedness to peers and communities, and families as advocates and leaders. So using the framework with these family engagement outcomes provides a template and a map, if we'd like to use this framework, for us to plug in the work that we're doing to engage families. I feel like it's really helpful to have a framework available so that we can think about how we'd like our work to look and use a framework to help guide our family engagement philosophy, activities, and strategies. Next slide, please. So in the PFCE engagement framework, it promotes family and child outcomes. This is one of the reasons why I love this framework, is because it's of the dual nature of it. It's just not family, and it's just not parents or children. It's parents and children in the whole family unit. These are outcomes that we want for all families, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what language they speak. And the two key elements for this framework are positive goal-oriented relationships and equity, diversity, cultural, and linguistic responsiveness. So the next framework is another framework that I have used and like to use, and that is used in a different system. Next slide, please. This is the Department of Education's dual capacity framework for family school partnerships. And so this is a really great framework to use in the K through 12 system, but also it could be used outside of the system, because the challenge, as is mentioned in the red area, talks about the lack of opportunities for school and program staff to build their capacity for partnerships. And it also talks about the lack of opportunities for families to build the capacity to partner with school staff. So then what we have a lot of times is ineffective family school partnerships. So in this framework, it talks about the 3 things that need to happen that really can help solve the problem. And just being really kind of simple about this, it's really about building the capacity of school program staff to be able to effectively engage families. And it's also about building the capacity of families to be able to have healthy communication with families as families interact in the K through 12 system. Someone asked a question about, will you be able to receive the PowerPoint after? Yes, the PowerPoint will be posted to the California Project Launch website, and you will have access to that PowerPoint. This webinar is also being recorded, so you can go back and share it or look at it again if you so choose to do so. So the Department of Education's dual capacity framework, their really important tag here is that research shows that initiatives that take on a partnership orientation in which student achievement and school improvement are seen as shared responsibility, relationships of trust and respect are established between home and school, and families and school staff see each other as equal partners, create the conditions for family engagement to flourish. This is the 3rd framework that I'll be introducing today, and then we'll talk a little bit more about our personal whys. But this is the pathway to improve outcomes for children and families. This is the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework, which is another great approach and framework that we can use in all of our work. All families need each of these protective factors in a robust way to be healthy. So we know that the outcomes or the results that we want are at the bottom. They are strengthened families, optimal child development, and reduced likelihood of child abuse and neglect. This is a very wonderful framework to follow because it gives us language that we can also use with families so that providers, professionals, and parents and families and community can all be using the same language. So we talk about parental resilience, how parents can be strong and flexible. How can we create programming that helps families become more resilient, that helps parents become resilient or be able to recognize their own resilience as they move forward in their parenting and family journey. We talk about social connections. How are parents connected to their community and individuals in their community? Do they have friends? Are they isolated? Knowledge of parenting and child development. This is understanding that everyone was parented by someone. When we become adults, we get to judge whether these people who raised us did a really good job or not. And then when we have our own children, we make decisions about what kind of parent we want to be based on our parenting experience, what we've learned. Some things we need to unlearn, and sometimes we need to learn new things. Concrete support in times of need is really about children and families having their basic needs met, but also understanding and knowing how to get those needs met during times of crisis, and understanding that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but that is also really a sign of strength. And the 5th protective factor is the social and emotional competence of children. And that is teaching children really how to use their words, how to express their emotions appropriately through words, and then how we interact with others in a very social world that we live in. At the top of each of the protective factors, you'll see that there are everyday actions that agencies and organizations and systems can put in place to help parents build these 5 protective factors, which research says if parents have these robust protective factors happening in their lives and in their homes, there's reduced likelihood of child abuse and neglect, we'd have optimal child development, and we'd have strong families. So in an encapsulated nutshell, we're seeing that each of these frameworks are speaking to results of optimal child development, strong families, and families with reduced likelihood of child abuse and neglect. And each system is invested, all of our systems are invested in making sure families are well, children are safe, and that we have safe communities. Next slide, please. So also in CSSP's approach, they pull out a little bit and zoom out and just talk about the nature of service delivery. So the first point is that it is essential to provide concrete support in a manner that does not increase stress. And I'm sure all of us can think of times when service delivery or the nature of service delivery could increase stress, and we can think about ways of how we can deliver services to families who are already under an incredible amount of stress at times, so we do not increase their stress. Services should be coordinated, respectful, caring, strength-based, and trauma-informed. Of course, coordinated means that we aren't sending families all over town to receive the services that they need, that we coordinate with other agencies, community-based agencies and systems, that the services be respectful, that we respect parents' time, that we respect their stories and be non-judgmental, that we're caring, and that we see their strengths before we see their weaknesses. And that in articulating the principles of strength-based practice with parents, it is essential to forge a trusting relationship between parents and service providers. So forging a trusting relationship is no easy task. It takes time. It can take years, depending on the families that we're working with. And I think it's really important that we be mindful that so many of the families that we are working with have been through so much, and they have worked through so many systems that it's understandable that it's hard sometimes for them to trust, but it's possible. Next slide, please. So the 3 frameworks that I've introduced to some, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, are the Head Start's Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Framework, the Department of Education's Dual Capacity Framework, and the Center for the Study of Social Policies, Strengthening Families Approach and Protective Factors. These 3 frameworks are very helpful in guiding our work in terms of how we would like to engage families and communities. Next slide, please. So back to the why. So we know why systems are desiring to engage families. We know why systems have a desire to engage communities, because we all want healthy families and we all want healthy communities. And each organization that we come from has its own mission statement and has its own vision statement. What I'm going to ask now is that you think about your personal level why. Why are you in this work? Why is it important to you to effectively and respectfully engage families and community? Okay, great. If we could go to the next slide. So the reason why I introduced that, some of you may have seen that. I saw that at, I think, a conference, or maybe I was even on a webinar when I saw that. But it impacted me because how many of us have forgotten why, or our why. And how often do we need to reconnect to what our why is, our personal why we are inspired and motivated and continue to do this work, because this is really hard work. It is hard work to engage families. This webinar is not even about outreach. This webinar, and we know how hard it is to outreach to families. We know how hard it is to get families in the door and in the seats, because a number of barriers that we will not address in this webinar. That would be a completely different webinar. But this webinar is about preparing our organizations from the inside out, which means preparing ourselves from the inside about how we need to be in order to successfully, respectfully, and authentically engage families. So what is your why? Why do you show up to work every day besides your paycheck? Why do you show up every day to engage the families that and community members that you're engaging? Because it's probably not the same why that the system has. It's probably not the same why that your organization, your agency has, but there's a reason why you began this work and why you were attracted to it. And so my ask is that, of course, I'm not going to say you need to come up with that by the end of this presentation and share with us all, but I'm just asking that we return to our why sometimes, especially when we get discouraged, because I know this work sometimes can be discouraging. But when we can fall back, when I'm able to fall back on my why, about why I show up to do this work, it just energizes me and it motivates me to continue to be resilient in this work. So what's your why? Next slide, please. So in each of the frameworks, there's these takeaway words. And I highlighted many of them in red on each of the slides when we defined the framework or areas of the framework. I highlighted them in red. And then also on this slide, I just kind of put them on a blackboard to pull each of these words out, and just to have, maybe if we were in a webinar, we could talk back and forth, we'd have a discussion about them. Or if we were in a workshop, we'd have a discussion about what it means to have family engagement that has equity, or what it means to have family engagement where we have systemic inclusion. Or systemic inclusion in family engagement means that families are making decisions about how they are served in a system from every point of the system, right? From budgets to hiring to policies and procedures. They are co-designers in how systems need to respond and react to families, because they're the end users of our systems and know what would work better than other things. What is coordinated? What does it mean to have a coordinated system? What does it mean to have cultural and linguistic responsiveness? Does that just mean making sure all of our documents are translated? No, it means that our documents are translated, but also adapted in a way, in a culturally sensitive and linguistic way, right? So these are all words that we can unpack and think about when we look at these frameworks. What does it mean to be an equal partner? What does it mean to have family wellness be at the center of the work that we're doing to engage families? Next slide, please. So in many of the workshops that I lead with parents, professionals, and service providers, is I ask a really simple question. And the question is, when I'm engaged, I feel. And these are the answers that I've gotten from a variety of workshops that I've led over the years. So people say when they're engaged, they feel connected to others. When they're engaged, they feel peaceful, reflective, transformational. And then you have the two on the right, which were two different groups, but a lot of the same words. I feel energized, excited. I feel helpful to others. I feel empowered. I feel motivated. I feel connected. Are the activities and programs that we're designing for families and communities to be engaged, making them feel any of these ways? So we can ask this very simple question to families, and we can ask providers, because most of this probably did come from providers and professionals, what they need to feel engaged. Many times they're the same words that parents and community say that they need to feel engaged. So checking back to make sure what we're designing, and hopefully designing it with families and community, will help them feel these things, and they'll be engaged in the programming and the workshops and other activities for capacity building to take place. So a lot of this work is moving from random acts of involvement, or what people like to say is one-time actions or activities, often disconnected, to a specific purpose taken to involve families. So like I said, I have 3 kids. I have a 20-year-old who is going into his junior year in college. I have a son that's going to his junior year of high school, and I have a son that is going to 8th grade. So I've experienced pre-K, K through 12, and post-12. So I have a little bit of an understanding of what happens in each area of education. A lot of times the one-time actions or activities are really fun activities. They really get parents out of the house. They get communities to the activity or to the workshop, but a lot of times they're disconnected from the other activities that are happening, and they're not engaging families to create what these one-time actions or activities are. They're hosted by the school or the organization, and that's great, but it's involvement and it's not engagement. So what we're speaking of when we're talking about family engagement is really moving from random acts of involvement to the next slide, which is authentic family and community engagement. So this is when families are welcome partners and participate in program planning, design, and implementation. And even inside of program planning, design, and implementation, there's hiring, there's budget decision-making, there's priority. What priorities do we take on first? What are the most important things that parents would like to, or topics that they like to discuss or need more information about when we are designing our family engagement programs? Next slide, please. So this means moving from a traditional model of family involvement to a more transformational model of family engagement. So in involvement, families are allowed in, as you can see the cartoon on the bottom, and engagement, families are buying in. Whatever's happening at their school site or the organization that they attend for specific services, they have bought in to that organization's mission, values, goals, and they're a part of the planning and implementation of the programming that happens there. And when parents are bought in, then they become the best recruiters for the services, for the community-based agency, for the school, because there is an ownership that comes and a pride of being associated with something that I help build and that I help create. Next slide, please. So on the left-hand side is more traditional way of looking at family engagement and involvement. And then on the right-hand side is more of a transformational way of looking at family and community engagement. So as you can see, the traditional is more about individuals taking responsibility for their families, being able to find what they need, where the transformational aspect is that families, we are sharing responsibility with families. that is, everything is not solely on the family. How can families be connected to community and other families to meet their goals and to meet their needs? Traditional is what's wrong with this family, what needs to be solved, what are the things, what are all the risks associated with this family? Where the more transformational is about identifying strengths, being collaborative with the family, but also hoping and knowing that strengths can mitigate some of the risks, but seeing the strengths first before we jump on the deficits. We're moving, I already said this, from random acts of involvement to systemic and integrated ways of engaging families. Oh, could you go back, please? So also, there's always just a hope that sometimes when different programs come in, that this new thing that we're doing is going to be the thing that gets all the families out. It's going to be this magic bullet or this silver program that everyone is going to come out to. And rarely that's the case. And so moving toward how does everything that we do to engage families in community, how is it connected? And how are families able to come in at each stage of their journey as a family and be part of what's happening at our agency? It's going from compliance to you need to do what we say on this form if we're working kind of like in a child welfare kind of place, to families participating in their own design of what they would like their family goals to look like. Is going from staff directed to family directed, and it's going to contextual, where what is the entire context of the family? Where is this family coming from? What has this family already experienced? And how can we use that to create a more trusting relationship, but also be responsive to the needs that the families have? Next slide. So with participatory approaches, and I'm sure many of you are doing very well at participatory approaches. When we have really effective ones, they end up with outcomes with family strengthening, parents having skill training, and then there's parent leadership that's supported by the organization. Next slide, please. So this next part of the webinar is really about developing the structures to support transformational family engagement. So whatever program you have or workshop or classes, there's all this structure that should and is usually in place before we even start. So with California Project Launch, we created kind of a template to help guide our work in each of the counties that we worked in, so we know be able to map what's happening in terms of family engagement in the areas where we were doing the grant. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just a picture of a scaffold. So when there's construction happening, when things are being built, we have to have a scaffolding. We have to have a structure to hold up what we're trying to do and the goals that we're trying to accomplish. So whenever we're coordinating or doing something new, it's always like these questions, like who's gonna do it? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna do it? When? Our why again? And what is our budget? That's also a what. How much money do we have? Who's gonna be assigned to this work? Is it someone that already has 5 other job responsibilities? And is that realistic that a person that has 5 other job responsibilities could be a family engagement person as well, that could be as effective as possible if they have 5 other jobs? So the next slide will be just a little bit of what the template looks like. You will be able to look at this template and have it for yourself if you go to the website. So basically there's each component, then there's decisions, next steps, timing, who will be the lead, what are the other staff resources available, and then there was the recommendation from the TA team, which was myself and Carla Keener from First 5 Alameda. So it's about building a foundation. So the first 7 questions here was like, who are we trying to reach? Who is the population that we're trying to reach? And going even further, where do they live? Is there a specific zip code that we're trying to find to engage families from? What is our budget? How much money do we have to do this? Who's going to be the fiscal lead? Because a lot of times in collaborating with other organizations or systems, there's usually, or sometimes there could be a fiscal lead agency, and then there could be a programmatic or implementation lead agency. So then the next question is, who, and it could be the same person. The fiscal lead could also be the programmatic lead. Who are the trusted community partners that parents already look to in your community? They could be your organization. It could be other organizations. Would they be willing to partner with you on your event, on your workshop, on your strategic planning to engage families and communities? And what are the existing parent engagement activities that are happening in and around your community, in and around your complex system, so we are not duplicating efforts, so that maybe we can partner to do things instead of everyone doing their own thing that is very similar. So after you go through each of these components, you're making a decision about that component. You're compiling what your next steps need to be, your timing, who's the lead on each of these components. Do we need additional staff resources? Do we need additional budget to make this realistic? And then you could probably erase this next column, which is the TA team recommendation, unless you have a TA team, and they could make their recommendation in that column. Next slide, please. So this is the other questions that we ask, like, what is the contracting process like? When we want to involve families in some systems or stipend families, it could be, very arduous and complicated to stipend families. But if we know that from the beginning, maybe we can begin working on that. What is going to be the design of what you're doing? For this implementation template, it was for the cafe approach. Who's going to staff, train, and supervise what's happening? Organizational staffing, what is the schedule going to be? Are we going to meet once a week or once every other week or once a month? Will there be a referral process from outside agencies? Will we accept parents from agencies that are not receiving services from our own agency? Will there be a parent leadership component? Where do we want to host our workshops or our programs and activities? Is there childcare? Is there food? Will there be incentives? What is our outreach, promotion, and marketing going to be? And then other things that you can add that might be essential to you creating successful and sustainable family and community engagement strategic plans. So this template really helps map every asset you have as an organization before you even launch a new program or launch a new series of workshops. What is already happening? Where would you identify that you maybe need more support and more help? And then we launch after we do this really exhaustive planning template. Next slide, please. So for Project Launch in California, we created the implementation template, and then we also created a guide that defined each of the components. So it's very self-explanatory about the target population. For launch, we had to address a health disparity per launch, and it had to be connected to home visiting clients. That was one of the areas, that was what had to happen during launch implementation. But for you, your system has its own reason for targeting a specific population, and that is something that you can talk about in the groups when you're planning for your family engagement strategy. And then we also had recommendations. So we had basic component, again, the definition of each of the components, and we had a recommendation from the TA team. Next slide, please. So whenever we're launching, or we want to launch, or we want to remain strong in our family and community engagement processes and strategic planning and programs in complex bureaucratic systems, I'm saying that we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And we might even need more things. But these are the 5 things that I feel like if we don't have this, it's really, really hard to do sustainable, effective family and community engagement. So there has to be the will, the energy, the time, passion, and resources in order for things to be sustainable and in order for things to be effective. Because we know with family engagement, sometimes things happen and then you ask what happened to that and it's like, oh yeah, we had to stop doing that. Oh, we don't have that grant anymore, so we don't do that anymore, right? And so there are all these stops and starts that are always happening. So in bureaucratic systems, we need a champion for an approach who can present creative solutions to address the challenges that we will inevitably face, the delays, like contracting delays and figuring budgets out and barriers, that's able to develop and maintain relationships with other key decision makers who represent other systems. So we need a champion in place who can develop relationships. If I'm at child welfare, I can develop relationships with the early child care people, or I can develop relationships with the social services people, right? So then we can speak together about how we are engaging families and community. And that supports the development of structures. So that means having enough money, having enough people, and that there's accountability for that. And often there's no accountability or little accountability when it comes to family and community engagement. But if we have a champion in place who is demanding that there be accountability when it comes to family and community engagement, and also putting the resources behind it, the chances of the engagement being more successful increases. Next slide, please. So we are at our question time. So what we did just really briefly is introduce the 3 frameworks, talked a little bit about why. I asked you about your why, so you may be still formulating your own why, and then talked about the structures that also need to be in place in order to support whatever we're doing, whatever curriculum, whatever workshop, whatever program, the things that need to be in place. And often those things that are not in place are what derail our wonderful plans when we want to engage families. So we can start with questions now.
Tara, we have a question. How can we get the full template of this planning activity for this planning activity?
I think we can upload the template on the website. Can we do that, Lilia?
Yes, we will do that. It will be posted in the family engagement.
Yeah, and what we can also do is maybe we can post it as a really like generic, so then you can add spaces for your own question as well. We'll leave the questions that are on there or the components, but we'll also have space for you to add your own components as well. Someone asked, under what tab will the presentation be posted on the site?
Yes, that will be posted in the family engagement tab. And this is our website link, www.caprojlaun.org. That's our California Project Launch website, where you can find a lot of resources and the section, especially with all the information related to family engagement.
Are there any areas that you would, I had a lot of slides, so I think I would kind of quickly. Are there any areas that you'd like to hear more about? The family engagement approach that we used in the grant, we used a cafe approach to engage families. So I hope many of you are familiar with parent cafes. We called our cafes family cafes, where the whole family was invited to attend. And we had questions based on each of the protective factors that people were able to answer together and learn more about each of the 5 Strengthening Families protective factors. How do I identify the content for your cafes? That's an awesome question. For some of our cafes, we have already designed questions that we use. Also in your cafes, you can ask the participants what are the topics that they would like to know more about and to discuss. Ideally, in the cafe approach, you want parents and family members to be your cafe team. So there's a regular meeting with the cafe team to identify questions, to identify themes that speak to what the community is experiencing, and to develop the content for the cafe. So not only is the cafe engaging families the day of the cafe, we are continuing to engage those parent leaders who are part of the cafe team on an ongoing basis, and they become the team that is engaging other families and community members with the institutional support. At the bottom of each of the slides, when I was reading a definition or pulled out certain areas of a definition or something from a framework, each of those slides has I cited where I took everything from, so then you can go back and also read those source documents. Everything that is there is on the web. You can find it. Strengthening Families information is all over the web. The California Department of Ed's dual capacity framework is on the web. You can download everything and read it for yourself. The Head Start website is an amazing website when it comes to family and community engagement and how you use their framework to kind of guide your own program or your own family and community engagement strategy. So if there are no more questions, here is the contact information for myself and for Carla. If you have any additional questions, or if you'd like to speak with either of us about the work that we did with California Project Launch, and just kind of have discussions about the work that we did, how we worked with the counties. We worked in 3 counties, how that went, what we did, what we learned, barriers, all of that kind of talk. We are open to that. My website is here, not website, but my email address is here. And then Carla's email address is here as well. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you. There are upcoming webinars. So Professional Boundaries and Self-Care for Mental Health Consultants will be taking place on August 19th from 10 to 11 Pacific time. And then the webinar after that on September 9th will be how to hire a mental health consultant, finding the right match for your program. That will be on September 9th, 2019 from 12 to 1 Pacific time. The registration link for all of our webinars is here. And if you need that link, we can put it in the chat box. Also, if you were registered for this webinar, you will probably receive an automatic invitation to be a part of the 2 upcoming webinars. Again, I would just like to close with hoping that everyone is able to identify your why, the why you do the work for yourself individually, what motivates and inspire you to show up every day to authentically and respectfully engage families, that you write it down, that you post it and be able to look at it every single day. I just want to say thank you for being a part of our webinar today and hope that you have a really, really great week.